clapping and celebration in the chat for you and what Dr. Sanchez just said about your nomination. So congratulations. Anyway, Dr. Sanchez, I'll let you take it away. I gave a little overview, an introduction, and did mention how you might have found your connection to the University of Florida at TREC. And we hope that you will be able to come back down soon. So,
well, it's about time. The first time I went to Homestead, as it was called then, was when I was 7 years old, accompanying my father, who was trying to get some new mango and avocado varieties from there, and he did, and they were very, very profitable in Cuba. So I want to go back. It's been a heck of a long time. So next time we're out of COVID, certainly I would be there. So I can't wait to see you. But today, I think I asked Yung Kong, and he said, you should talk about a broader issue, which is agricultural yields most improved in sub-Saharan Africa, where I've been working basically for the last 30 years, about half of that living there and about half of that commuting. And this is based on a science article that Tom Jane from Michigan State and I put together. He's an eminent agricultural economist, well experienced in Africa. And so we thought an agricultural economist and an agronomist or soil scientist could get some things, could put things in a different perspective. So this is what I'm going to try to do. And can you see the slide okay?
Yep. We see the slides in slide view, not presenter view, if that's okay for you.
Okay, fine. Okay. Fine. Well, one thing people don't realize is that sub-Saharan Africa has made enormous progress since the beginning of the century and up to 2020 when COVID hit us all, and we don't know yet what happened there. The sub-Saharan African's population is supposed to double by 2050 to 2.5 billion people, comprising more than a quarter of the world's total. That's a Malthusian disaster. It's just a perfect recipe for Malthus to get his thoughts through. But it is really being balanced now by very rapid economic growth. And that's amazing. Sub-Saharan Africa, or I'll call it Africa, achieved the highest rate of growth in agricultural production value, crops and livestock, of any region in the world since the beginning of the century, about 4.3% per year, roughly double that of the prior 3 decades. The prior 3 decades, the last third of the, or fourth of the 20th century, were terrible in Africa. But now things have changed. And in the past 20 years, food production in Africa has outstripped the lack of progress of the previous 40 years. Agricultural value added per worker in real 2010 US dollars rose from $846 in 2000 to about twice, 1,563 in 2019, a 32% annual rate of growth. And the share of people living in less than the World Bank's new poverty, absolute poverty a day, it used to be $1 a day, now it's $1.90 a day. That level declined from 58% in 2000 to 41% in 2015. And the interesting thing, after traipsing, I traipsed all over Africa, clearly about 20 or 25 of the countries with the Millennium Villages project. But we can see now that most Africans are now engaged in off-farm employment that provides considerably higher living standards than subsistence farming. They still do the subsistence farming or subsistence farming, but that they're doing something else now. And one thing I love is this picture. First, because it came from the Economist magazine, but I was able to identify exactly where this was. This is not South Africa. This is the Tilapia Beach in Kisumu, Kenya, in Lake Victoria. And it's a place that I go a lot to. We used to rent a house in Kisumu and working there for the Millennium Villages. The interesting thing is people like these that you see there are now members of the middle class. And they increased, particularly since connectivity jumped with undersea internet cables. That gives us now some reasonably pretty good connectivity all over Africa. It is now, the middle class, it is now to consist of 330 million people, spending about $1.6 trillion a year together. 330 million people is the population of the United States. So right now, that really didn't exist. And when I was Director General of the World Agroforestry Center and was planning, got money for increasing the building size, I show it to my mentor, Professor Niall Brady from Cornell, who's always been my mentor. And he also was Director General of one of the centers, the Rice Institute. So I asked him as we're coming in, Niall, we're planning now so many parking spaces for the new buildings. And he said, double it. And I did. And he was right. It is when people started leaving, taking the aircraft buses from all over Nairobi and driving their own car, a clear middle class situation. Things have really changed in Africa. And this is not what you hear, because good news are not really very, very interesting news. So most African countries show a strong correlation between agricultural growth and the gross domestic product. This is sort of the mantra, the dogma of people like John Mellor and other ones taught me when I was in school. I did minor in ag economics and with a major in soil science. And this is what they were saying then. It's still true. Agriculture has also enabled the rapid development of value chains that link farmers to Africa's growing middle areas, enable Africa's labor force to gradually diversify into off-farm employing. I'm not talking about the value change of all this big, huge ships stuck in Los Angeles now that we see. That's the effect of COVID, and it's horrible. But at the African level, where we don't have to cross an ocean, this is getting better. And when agricultural grows, and this is a theory from way, way back, when agricultural growth, its extensive linkages between agricultural value chains and non-farm sectors drives employment and income growth more. Since the beginning of this century, Africa has been the world's second fastest growing regional economy, exceeded only by Asia. And guess what? There is a pretty obvious correlation between the blue line, which is the annual percent of annual growth of agriculture in its broadest way, crops, livestock, forestry, and fishing, and in the GDP of sub-Saharan Africa. You can see it's an R-square value of 48%. So yeah, the old theories that I was taught at school way back when still hold, and they are very, very pleasing. That's not to say that everything is fine and hunky-dory. Much of the continent still suffers from food insecurity, inequality, gender discrimination, corruption, poor infrastructure, political upheaval, and in many cases, high vulnerability to climate change. So not everything is rosy. The overall picture is, but not everybody is in the shape that I have implied. However, cereal yields in Africa rose by half of that of South Asia and Southeast Asia in the last 40 years. That's pretty poor. That's very bad. And even worse, and this is one of the take-home messages of this seminar, roughly 75% of the crop production growth came from the expansion of area under cultivation and only 25% from improvements in crop yield. In other words, the vast majority of the tremendous growth that we have experienced in food production in Africa during the last 20 years came from area expansion and not from improvements in crop yield. This is really disappointing to anybody who's a crop researcher. And I'm afraid that I have seen this in many parts of Africa, Mozambique, in Tanzania, an area where people are clearing not forest, but savannas and are expanding their area. And therefore we get a lot higher production. This is data to support this sad idea. Sub-Saharan Africa's agricultural growth still remains mainly for cropland expansion, not enough for productivity growth, that is yield. And we have here 4 major crops: maize, wheat, rice, and cassava. The blue change is the annual change in area by percents, and that means expansion. And the orange is annual change increase in yields. So you see that the bulk of maize is due to annual increase in area. In wheat, it's the opposite, but wheat is a very limited crop in Africa, only in the highland areas, as you would imagine. In rice, but the same idea, and in cassava, a miserable increase in cassava yields. So this is, yeah, it's progress, but it's not the kind of progress that we would like to see. So this we call extensification, and this we call intensification, and a phrase that is now very fashionable is sustainable intensification. I won't discuss the sustainable part of it, but anyway, extensification versus intensification. So why is intensification necessary? They're mounting land pressures. And the other one is the environmental cost of area expansion. And that second one we can take care of easily. There's biodiversity loss, all sorts of additional carbon emissions, et cetera, if you clear savanna land that wasn't cleared before. But on mounting land pressures, many young rural Africans today cannot obtain additional land through inheritance or customary land institution as they used to. They used to have the chief or the father indicating that they could, say, get married, they could cultivate this piece of land, and that's theirs. It usually went to men, and women still in many areas have no rights of land whatsoever. That is changing for the better, but still not good. So even though most of sub-Saharan Africa might be considered land abundant, and it is, if you divide the area, the huge area, this is 3 times the size of the continental United States. So this is a big chunk of land. By the number of people, you would say, this is land abundant. But the fact is that a large proportion of the rural Africans now face land scarcity because in the areas where they're concentrated, there is land scarcity. Land prices in the region are also rising rapidly, even in areas once considered remote. So again, things are changing, and in this case, for the worse. So I think we have to do some things differently and doing some things more efficiently. And by we, I mean the whole African agricultural enterprise, of which people like me, we're called now Wazee. That means in Swahili, old people, and usually called Muzungus because we're not of the black race, but we were the ones who had to work there because people were not trained, and now that has changed a bit, a lot. So one of the things is soil health. And the reason why I mentioned soil health as a main problem is it's not because I'm a soil scientist. Actually, when I first moved to Africa, and I saw it right away, soil fertility depletion, tremendous deficiencies of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And I kept my mouth shut for about 2 years because I said, watch out, Sanchez, this is your field. And now you're going to tell people that it's your field, that's the most important. But after 4 years of roaming around, I couldn't keep quiet anymore and started raising hell about the fact that even African soils are actually much better than South American soils. Most of them are alpha soils, where farmers farm, but however, they have been depleted of nutrients. They have been depleted of nutrients because even though the yields are low, 1 ton per hectare of corn, it was the average of the 20th century. That's 16 bushels per acre in our ton, in our measurement, and that is of course a ridiculous yield of corn. But even though it's been low, these nutrients taken by harvest were not returned back to the soil, as it is the case everywhere. And the nutrients that remain as crop residues were either burned or fed to cattle. But in very, very few cases, they were returned. So that gives us a very unhealthy soil. So what are the things that has to be changed? And Tom Jane and I decided on 4 main components of really restoring soil health. And by soil health, as you know, there's a lot of definitions and so on. Soil health has to be for a specific use. A healthy soil for rice is not a healthy soil for corn, and so on. So always a specific use. In this case, maize, corn is the staple food, what people eat mainly in Africa, like us. Okay, so there are 4 things we think it's important. One is keeping the soil covered throughout the year. In areas in the subhumid tropics where you have a 3 to 6 month dry season and there's very little irrigation, the soil gets bare and then is subject to all sorts of soil erosion issues, especially when the rains start. We have to also, secondly, raise fertilizer use efficiency. Thank goodness, now fertilizers are really beginning to be used in Africa. And that didn't happen about 10 years ago, but there was a major fertilizer summit in Nigeria that really changed. Still, the amount of total fertilizer used per hectare is about it's about 1/7 of what it is used in Asia per hectare. So still very low. But anyway, so the first one is keeping the soil covered throughout the year. You would not expect this one as the first one. And I think it's the first one and it's the most difficult. Raising fertilizer use efficiency is the second one. Fertilizers are being used. A greater use of organic inputs, difficult, because there are not many of them, especially if they take out the crop residues. And sometimes when cattle is grazing fertility depleted soils and eating low nutrient content grasses, the quality of the manure is awful. Some of the manure in Zimbabwe, in areas like that, actually immobilize nitrogen from the soil instead of mineralize nitrogen to the soil. And finally, the use of improved high-yielding seeds. Even though that's supposed to be plant breeding, I think it's an integral part of soil health. So let's let's get a little bit on with details here. Keeping the soil covered throughout the year, we can do it. Farmers can do it in many ways. At my center, the World Agroforestry Center, we spent a lot of money in the 10 years when I was Director General of using improved leguminous fallows during the dry season when crops are not growing and they're deep rooted and they fix nitrogen and they recycle all sorts of nutrients and so on as the answer to this problem. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out. And after a lot of millions of dollars of investments in many countries in Africa, many national research institutions, we found only that the uptake of this was about 7% of farmers. And it took me a while. I mean, this was a very personal defeat to me. It took me a while until one day walking around some fields in Tanzania, and I said, of course, Sanchez, stupid idiot. These improved leguminous fallows are not subsidized and fertilizers are subsidized. Well, okay. And but how do you subsidize a bunch of seeds? How do you monitor that they are planted and not just in the edges of the field to impress visitors, but inside, and so on. So that research keeps going. Maybe now it's time to look at it from the soil health point of view in a new way. And if that's the case, Africa sure has the data. Crop rotation, one crop after another, at least for part of the dry season, for the wetter part of the dry season that still has residual moisture. By all means, all sorts of myriads of indigenous soil conservation practices during the dry season. And they're all over the place, and most of them are quite effective. Now, what I said, keeping the soil covered throughout the year doesn't apply to the semi-arid tropics, because the semi-arid tropics, that's more than 9 months dry season. It's natural for that ecosystem to have uncovered soils, bare soils. But for the subhumid tropics and the humid tropics, it's certainly important. So what can be done? And this is what I have to go to Malawi in a couple of weeks and talk to a presidential panel. And this is what I'm going to tell them. What can you do about this? Well, from other areas that I know, growing millet in the Cerrado of Brazil during the dry season, a very tolerant crop. In Africa, yeah, grow this improved leguminous fallows that we know very well. They fix 200 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. They do all sorts of wonderful things. Some of them even have insect repellent problems, which means that cows don't eat it. We don't care about the insects in this particular case. We care about the cows eating the only green thing that's around. This particular species shown here, Tephrosia, the genus Tephrosia, the animals just won't touch it, so you can grow them. It should be all legumes, by all means. And you can have improved pastures during the dry season if your farm size is big enough to support cattle or maybe just sheep and goats. And these are pictures from Brazil. the same soil in its unhealthy side. You see it dry, you don't see very many pores, and the healthy soil, you see it a darker color, meaning it's more moist and it's full of roots and it's full of bugs and all sorts of things. That's what we want. Okay, so that's the first thing and the most difficult things of what I'm proposing. The second one is rising fertilizer use efficiency. We think we should double something called the agronomic use efficiency. And that is defined by additional kilograms of crop output per kilogram of nitrogen applied. In other words, it doesn't involve the mineralization of soil organic nitrogen. The numbers range from 14 to 30 in Africa, and the highest numbers that we can see in the United States are about 50. Please don't use nitrogen use efficiency, which is kilograms of crop outputs per kilograms of nitrogen applied to the field as fertilizer. The fertilizer industry, of course, loves that because all the nitrogen that's been mineralized from the soil, it counts as though it came from the fertilizer. We've got to be a little wise when we talk with our industry colleagues on some of these issues. We have to overcome a problem of non-responsive soils, soils in which the yields are lousy, the crops are showing all sorts of deficiency symptoms, and the soil doesn't produce anything, even though you add fertilizer. It has to do with surface sealing and soil compaction and probably low soil organic matter contents. So that's a researching project. Policies to reduce fertilizer transit prices, including bribes, as fertilizer, most of the fertilizers are imported or the African fertilizer factories are near the coast. And we have to train a group of agro dealers, intermediaries between the farmers and the wholesale suppliers. And that is happening very, very well. And it's actually a very exciting thing. Something that I learned last year is that in addition to these agro dealers, which are mom and pop stores that used to sell you a Coke or a pack of cigarettes, now they're trained to sell you a bag of fertilizer and improve seeds and so on. They have the technical knowledge to do that. They've been trained this way. So you don't have to go to the big town to do that. But now there's another one that is not in this graph, which is, best way I would say it is building mini Cargills. Cargills is a huge American company that helps farmers in doing everything else but the act of farming. In other words, they plant the fertilizers, they sell the crops, they rent the equipment, they get loans, et cetera, et cetera. That facilitator, let the farmer do what the farmer can do best, especially important in smallholder farms, which is impossible for them to own a tractor, but you can rent a tractor, or that facilitating company can own a tractor and help mechanize your 1 hectare of corn. So that's fertilizer use efficiency. Now, greater use of organic inputs. We're going to create these organic inputs. They don't come automatically. If you have fertility depleted soils, you're not going to get biomass. But you cannot, we cannot solve the soil health problems by mineral fertilizers alone. Mineral fertilizers have no carbon. Organic inputs like manure and so on have a lot of carbon. Not that much, 2 to 4%, but a heck of a lot more than zero. Use high quality ruminant manures, not the Zimbabwean example, well cured. Return legumes any way possible. Certainly let the roots decompose in the soil, and return additional crop residues to the soil. this could only really happen if you triple your yields. And it's pretty easy in Africa to triple your corn yields from 1 to 3 tons per hectare. And the straw will go accordingly. So you may have some straw. You may be able to feed your animals and so on. Don't burn them, but then incorporate the rest of it. We have to combine the mineral and effective organic fertilizers. In this case, you have a gentleman here, colleague of mine, who was at ICRAF, and he just retired from being Minister of Agriculture of Tanzania. But he's looking at a crop of sesbania in the middle of a dry season during an El Nino year in Malawi. In southern Africa, El Nino means drought. And sesbania is quite happy, and the roots are deep. So there's nitrogen fixing trees, cover crops, mucuna, all sorts of cover crops, and of course, mineral fertilizers. But we have to go to the fourth point, which is increasing the use of improved high-yielding seeds. And there's a problem. Traditional breeders breed and select their crops under optimum conditions. Well-fertilized soils, irrigated soils, nice plots, and so on. And that is not what happens in African fields. So we have to get the breeders out of this idea and breed only actual conditions of low soil fertility and drought and so on. Luckily now there's been a lot of rising African-owned seed companies to supplement the multinationals. The multinationals are not running the show anymore. It's just this, there are over about 100 new 5 years old or so African seed companies, mostly run by women. And they do a good job in selling high quality seeds. So some of these long-term efforts pay. And I want to show you a slide here from my friend Joe DeVries, one of the best plant breeders in the world, a Gator, who has some awards from the University of Florida as well. And what he has done is look at the maize and rice yields that have taken off in African countries, receiving international support for improved seeds and mineral fertilizers at the national scale, compared with other countries that have not received such assistance and where yields remain stagnant. So this is a curve for the 15 assisted countries that I mentioned. And if you ask me, I can tell you which one they are. And this is a not assisted company with countries that are stagnated. There are 49 now, there are 49 sub-Saharan African countries. These are the 30 most important. The rest are very small or not agricultural at all. They're in desert areas or oil producers and so on. So we can see here that in some years they're getting about 2.4 tons per hectare. Again, we want to go to 3 tons per hectare or more, but the progress is evident, while the countries that have not received assistance have not done well. And now these countries now are asking for assistance, and Joe DeVries is trying to do it. So we'll see better. Okay, these are things related to what I would call soil health, which is a very broad term the way I use it. But what other stuff can be done at scale? Extension. Extension is a real failure in Africa. Why? There are extension agents all over the countries, mostly provided by the governments, and they're good people. They're people, I know many of them, and they know what they're doing, but they don't have the tools to do the job. They don't have a pickup truck. They don't have gas to put in a pickup truck. They don't have a motorcycle. They don't have a computer. So it's hard for them to reach farmers. There's one exception in Ethiopia, currently at war, unfortunately. But, Ethiopia has 1/2 of Africa's extension workers, and it's the #1 country, or was, in agricultural growth. So we need extension service, whether it's private or public, using new tools. Just about everybody in Africa, every adult person has a smartphone, and they actually do a lot of business with a smartphone. This is a very good tool for showing the results of soil testing and how much fertilizers you apply and so on. The second one is insufficient investment in national agricultural research. Asian governments, the national agricultural research of Asian governments spend 4 times more per farmer per hectare than African governments. It's something that has to be, it's a policy issue. Yeah, you can depend on donors, but donors are not that reliable, frankly. And you shouldn't have these dependencies. You should do it yourself, like the African government, like the Asian governments have done. Donors shy away from long-term investments. They love to have a 2-year project that will claim that increase yields by so much %, but you don't know whether that's going to be sustainable or not. So donors shy away from long-term investments in adapted research and extension. Cereal yields have increased now for almost 2 tons per hectare per year. Not enough. Must go to 3 tons at least. And again, 3 tons is 48 bushel per acre. So it's no big deal. We need to have the governments to have policies that increase yields, intensification, and minimize extensification. We need, thank goodness there's a lot of them right now, agro dealers and these multi-purpose farmer support organizations like Cargill does in the United States, but owned by a combination, I've seen the best in Kenya, combination of large and small farmers that are owning these companies. And they tell the people what to do. And then you have people who know about fertilizer prices, logistics, how to get a tractor, and so on. And finally, we need to shift from food security to nutritional security. Everybody now in this area of development knows that majority of the people are suffering from either undernutrition, not enough food, or not the right the right components like micronutrients, and then there's the obesity aspect. I heard on the radio yesterday, but I don't know where it came from, that now there are more obese people in the world than malnourished people in the world. They eat just calories and just get very fat. We certainly have this problem in Florida, in their food deserts as well. So a change of crops is necessary. I made some calculations in another paper that shows that this would be a major revolution in the world if we can shift from low nutrient dense crops such as cereals, root and tubers, sugar, oil palm oil, and so on, to grain legumes, to vegetables, more fruits, more tree nuts, particularly a very attractive situation, and of course, more milk and fish products. That is another issue subject to another seminar, but many of us are involved in that and pushing as much as we can the conscience of people, both in Africa and this country, about the fact that we really have to shift from food security. We have to attain food security to nutritional security. So that's the end of my talk, Ashley. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sanchez. That was excellent. I'll open the floor for questions. You can either, we're a small group, so if you just want to raise your hand, you can do
Sure.
that, or you can type them in the chat and I'll monitor the chat. So,
Actually,
Young, go for it.
okay. Dr. Sanchez, before I ask a question, I'd like to say thank you again for giving us the excellent seminar. I hope next year you can come here. We can talk with you in person and show you our progress. I think you can see lots of changes for last 50 years.
Right.
Yeah.
You're very nice. At least 70 years.
Oh, 70 years, good. So I already make a program to show you around in the homestead, also in our center.
Okay.
So
I'm really looking forward to that.
Okay, that will be next year. And
Yes.
and if our people want to listening more about your lecture, I think you're going to give a talk tomorrow for food security workshop, right?
And yes, I have to. I'm kind of Zooming almost full time. Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I already signed up. I think anybody, our student want to listening, and they can listen to you more tomorrow.
Yeah. This is a more political thing. This is a more political because there'll be all sorts of congressmen and so on in there.
Yeah, I look at it. You're the only one scientist for the agriculture there.
Right.
Yeah,
So
so
we gotta do our thing.
you need to teach
Talk to
them
the
about the
politicians.
science.
Talk to the politicians. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Sanchez, my question is, I'm really amazed by your talk. You really demonstrated many practice for soil health, almost cover everything we talk in the soil fertility class. I want to know what's the role of mineral fertilizer for those agriculture production increase for last 10 or 20 years. And should we encourage people there to use more or less mineral fertilizers?
Well, at this point, we need more. We need more fertilizer. There isn't enough. There isn't enough. There are fertilizer factories, nitrogen Haber-Bosch factories now for the first time in Africa. There are a few of them. That means you don't have to import urea from Europe or the United States. Africa actually has a lion's share of phosphorus deposits in the world. It's not in the tropics, it's in North Africa, but it's close. And Morocco is now getting politically involved in the rest of Africa in a positive way. Potassium is just about everywhere, and there's plenty. There's plenty there. Sulfur is a big problem. Sulfur deficiency is a big problem. So, for example, the Malawi fertilizer subsidy program is NPS. They don't care about potassium. They seem to have enough, but they want to put sulfur. We need more fertilizer at this point. I know in other parts of the world, we need less fertilizer, too much or too little. There are different situations, but ye gods, each one has to be solved in its own way. We need more fertilizers in Africa.
Thank you.
Dr. Blair had his hand up.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Sanchez. I'm the ag economist here at TREC, and I actually worked at ECRAF from 2014, 2018.
Oh,
And
good for you.
yeah, I was in Lima. I was based in Lima.
Okay.
But one of the things that was going on ECRAF, and you got to your last point, because you're talking all about cereal crops. And I remember one of the big things they were working on was on these orphan crops, introduction to them and the importance of having nutritious diets, and how we're so dependent on only a few commodity crops. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about that.
Yeah. At ECRAF, what is now called the World Agroforestry Center, we had a tree domestication program. We have a tree domestication program, which is now very much DNA based and genes and so on. But to look at indigenous fruits in the tropics. In Africa, we have some wonderful fruits that are not known everywhere else and quite nutritious. Latin America is full of very good fruits, maracuya, this and that and the other one, that are not known in Africa, are not known in Asia. Asia has wonderful fruits. Rambutan, many other fruits native of Asia that are not known, that are unknown in other parts of the world, including the United States. So I think first promoting and understanding the forestry practices to have these trees produce good fruits, quality fruits, selecting the best fruit, selecting and so on. We can do a lot. But now ICRAF is also interested in the in the DNA and the more more fundamental aspects as well. Not that it's dropping the practical things, but more fundamental aspects. For example, there is one very famous tree in Africa called Phytherbia albida, or the Gao tree. It's called a confused tree because it drops its leaves during the rainy season and grows its leaves during the dry season. It's a legume in semi-arid Africa. I want to introduce that in many parts of Latin America, including my native country, Cuba. It could do a lot, being part of an upper story there. But they're studying the actual mechanism, the molecular mechanism, why this trait exists, so it could be transformed to other trees. So you can have an agroforestry system in which your trees are bare during the rainy season, so the crops can capture all the sunlight. And then during the dry season, you will get what I'm asking for, which is a tree protecting the soil surface. Doesn't matter if you're up in the tree. We need a vegetable cover protecting. So yeah, there are all sorts of things. I'm very proud of my old center. It's certainly now undergoing, the whole CGIR is undergoing some other worse than usual convulsions. But ICRAF and C4, the International Center for Forestry Research, decided to get out of the CG, and they're doing on their own. So we give them the best of luck. I think it's, I'm glad you were part of the ICRAF Center, the people working in Latin America, especially in the
We have a question in the chat from Richard. Has the distribution system improved in the last generation? And by distribution, he means transport infrastructure for incoming bulk nutrients.
Yes, what's the question?
Richard, I don't know if you want to turn on your mic and ask a follow-up.
Okay, the question arises because my experience in West Africa and North Africa is 30 years old. At that time, some of the projects where I was involved with, we could really not get off the ground because the cost of moving the nutrients from the port out to where the farms were just wasn't sustainable for the small farmers involved.
Okay, so now parts of Africa now use a base, a center of influence would be the agro dealers. The agro dealers will have their own space. Okay. And they're being supported by a digital soil map. We do have a digital soil map of Africa with all sorts of fertility situation. You can look it up at isda.org or something, ISDA. It's all over Africa, just the non-desert points of Africa, and you can and you can map yourself if with the right advice, where are the soils that really are deficient in phosphorus, for example, or where are those that are deficient in sulfur, or those that are calcareous like your soils in Homestead that are usually very deficient in iron and zinc. So that's getting better now. There are also all sorts of sensors that are being installed. We're using drones, not me. I used to direct this project, but then I'm no longer directing it. Other people are in charge of that. Drones and so on. We're gonna try to do it as efficient as possible, realizing that our constituency are smallholder farmers. So that changes things. In a smallholder farm, you have to realize that the fields closer to the household are more fertile than the fields away from the household, simply because that's where a lot of nutrients end up with. So things are better that during your days. I'm old enough, I'm 81 years old. I've been through those days too.
Thank you.
And we have time for about one more question. Young Kung, do you want to? I see your hands up, so I'll give the floor to you.
Okay, I wrote it in the chat. I thought you were going to read. I'll read it. Dr. Sanchez, many people told me this Africa problem is not a soil health, but the political issue, because many of those countries, like Ethiopia right now, is unstable and has no functional government. So what should farmers there to help themselves, and what can we help them as a scientist in the US? Two questions.
So you're talking about water and politics?
I see that the people, when I ask people, what can we help for the Africa? And many times they tell me, it's not a soil issue, that's a political issue. You cannot do anything. So what should we do? I know you did a lot, but right now I'm not really involved much. This morning I talked to my colleague, we want to do something. So what can we do to help people there when the government is not functional? It's like Ethiopia, it's pretty bad right now. So what can we do?
Well, I think a lot of us, we've done a lot in spite of all these constraints, in spite, the gentleman who was talking before, in spite of these constraints, we've done a lot. Yes, if you want to look for troubles, you got them there all over the place. But in spite of that, Africa has turned around in the last 20 years. And it's not because the donors became better, it's because Africans got more became more educated and got tools like the internet, and they're not stupid and they're taking care of it. Africa will be run by Africans and not us Muzungus. We were necessary when there were not very many Africans around. Now our job, we still have a job, an important job, and I'm going there in a couple of weeks, is we stay behind, and we are the backstop or the shortstops, let's say, of the pitchers who are native Africans, and make sure that they're educated, provide opportunities for them to attend an international conference in Utah last year, and so on, so they can practice their profession. That's what they want. They don't want additional money. They're reasonably well paid by their own standards. They want the ability to practice their profession. Imagine any of us who are serious about our profession. And I said, well, hell bells, I can't, I don't have the resources to do it. No way. There's a role for all of us. There's a role for graduate students. There's a role for seasoned scientists like you, Pong. And I think it's, I wouldn't offer any solutions. I would wait to be asked. Let the initiative come from the Africans. They're obviously not stupid. They've been very successful in the last 20 years. They got a huge middle class. It's them who would say, hey, I need somebody who can help me with X issue. And then it's us at the University of Florida and our other universities to facilitate that.
Very good. Thank you, Pedro.
We have one last quick question, I think, in the chat. What was the name of that confused tree? I think a lot of us might want to know.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a complicated name. The species name is Albida, Albida. It used to be called acacia, but for some reason the plant taxonomists decided to call it Phaedherbia, F-A-I-D-E-R-B-I-A. So it's Phaedherbia albida. It's known in West Africa as Gao. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing because it's the only confused, if you want to be, it's the only confused tree that we know in science, as far as I'm concerned. And obviously, it's not the only one. So we could do a lot of things if we can get trees like Phaedherbia albida, other trees, to do this trick of dropping their leaves during the rainy season and having a full canopy during the dry season.
Great. Well, thank you for your presentation, and thank everyone for coming to the TREC seminar. We will have one more seminar next month, and Dr. Sanchez, I hope we can see you down here soon. So
I hope so too, Ashley.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.